Hi, and welcome to The Working World. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Linger.
And Jamie, we just had a fantastic conversation with Marie-Claire, who is the speaker, facilitator, and mentor at Trustology. She's also the author of a recent book called Trusted to Thrive. And she was talking to us about what I guess managers can do to foster trust within their teams and kind of navigate this whole hybrid work scenario that's underway.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, as we all know, this has been a moving feast, and it's been an evolution of I suppose, finding our way, how to deal with employees, and how to build trust. And as Marie-Claire said, it's not just a one-way street. It actually has to be from both sides, and it has to be initiated from both sides. But I mean, look, lots of great takeouts. I think it's really, like all of our shows, I think that there's always little nuggets in there of learnings and of wisdom that, we can all take away back into our workplaces. So without further ado.
Yes. Hi, Marie-Claire. Welcome to The Working World. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. As we were having a little bit of a pre-show conversation, we were chatting about the very timeliness of this subject, especially for a lot of leaders out there who are grappling with how to lead their teams, what to do with their diverse teams, either locally or geographically spread. And so I know a lot of people are going to want to listen to your thoughts on this matter, especially in relation to some of the things that you've covered in your book release recently, which is the Trusted to Thrive. So if I could jump straight into the questions, if I may, I wondered whether you could share with us how the employee expectations for leaders changed since COVID.
Yeah, well, COVID's been a really interesting time for us as human beings, really, because we had to really rethink about what we want in life when we're in lockdown. And this is global. And a lot of the research points out that we've all basically re-emerged from the pandemic with different expectations of what we want from work. And number one is that our well-being has become a priority. And employees now, they actually weigh up what they want from their workplace. They're actually weighing up, how much effort do I have to put in to get this result? And is it worth it? Am I going to have to sacrifice time with my family or time on my personal health to meet these goals? And the reality is employees are saying no to that, which is why we're seeing the great resignation the world over. And in Australia, there was some research that came out recently from Allianz Insurance that found 42% of Australian employees are willing to resign the next 6 to 12 months.
Wow.
Which is 2 million people, which is a lot for us. And the reason is because people are working long hours, they're stressed, they're burnt out. And, people just don't think it's worth it. They want jobs where they have a better balance to enjoy their lives.
So, Marie-Claire, I suppose, and welcome to the show, obviously, but I suppose the question in a lot of people's minds will be, how do we head this off at the pass? I mean, if I sit here and say, okay, well, 42% of my team are going to resign, which strikes fear into my heart because we're so busy at the moment, we actually want to increase the team. And I said, okay, well, if I've got my growth plans, but also now my turnover percentage, how do employers like myself and managers out there actually start to head this off at the pass?
Well, there really is this clarion call now for leadership to lead differently. And, we're at this critical inflection point. We've had over 2 years to get moving to a hybrid workforce, right? But the cracks are starting to show. And employees want leaders to lead differently. They want leaders who care about them. They want leaders who are interested in them as people. And they want leaders who aren't overburdening them with too much work or making unrealistic demands. So there really is this need to shift how we're treating people. And, because there's such an issue with turnover, at the moment, employees have the power, but it's it's actually a good thing, because it's really time for us to reimagine the workplace and make work more enjoyable for everyone, including leaders, because it's not fun when you're battling people problems all the time. So it's really time for leaders to show more emotionally intelligent and supportive leadership behaviours.
It sounds like as well that there needs to be investment on both sides, so the employee and the leader, regardless of where you sit in the organisation, and there needs to be a good, healthy dose of trust in that. Now, why do you think trust is, probably one of the most important things that should exist in the workplace?
Yeah, you've actually kind of unpacked it in quite an interesting way. So in terms of trust, how I define it in the workplace, it's the ability for people to confidently rely on and predict that others will do the right thing and make good on their promises. So, any relationship is a social contract between one or more people, and it has responsibilities on both sides. But usually it's kind of, because of how we're programmed, we look out at the world to see if we're safe. We don't actually look out at the world to see, hey, I'm doing this that's actually causing trust issues. We kind of think it's everyone else's fault. So employees don't trust their bosses, and bosses don't trust their employees. And it's kind of at a crisis point. And what really has happened due to COVID is, of course, leaders have to trust their employees to be working now when they can't see them. That's a big issue for our brains. We feel like we have to observe people. And so there really now is this new expectation from employees who are working hard, but they don't appreciate how they're being measured, because those measurements aren't right anymore. And so leaders actually need to work with employees to measure their productivity differently. Now, there was a study that came out from Microsoft recently, huge global study, and they found that leaders don't think their staff are productive, and there's this huge gap between what employees are doing and how productive they are. And so what's really coming about now is that we actually need to start looking at how we measure outcomes and impact rather than tasks to be done. And that's a huge mindset shift, which is actually was going on before COVID, but COVID, since the pandemic, it's really become more important. And, not everyone's getting that right at this stage.
Sorry, can I just ask you to just go a little bit deeper into this, to measure the outcomes and impact? Because I know exactly what you're talking about when, we see companies who think that someone sitting in front of them is working with that person could be, probably wasting time or doing whatever. I'm not saying that everyone is, but I don't think that it's the environment that creates that. And I think that, it's a bit of it feels like an antiquated view, particularly after COVID, that, you've got to be sitting in front of me to be productive. Where my thinking is, well, hang on a second, you didn't have to endure public transport, you didn't have to go like this, you didn't have to, all those things that are associated with it. And I'm sort of thinking, well, you've actually got a bit more time on each end of the day, which makes it better. So, and I suppose for the audience, how would you sort of look at the outcomes and impacts, or what does that feel like?
Yeah, so it's really, in some ways, this is really sitting down with your employees and co-creating the right measurements as well. So, there's been an increase. I don't know if it's so much happening in Australia, but worldwide, productivity software where companies are actually tracking employees working at their desks. So how many meetings they're attending, how many hours they're logged on, all that sort of stuff, which can sometimes be irrelevant. But we need to sort of work out what it looks like, because, particularly with knowledge work, the outcomes, can take a long time. They're not something that happens in a day. And so it's really working that out and co-creating something and having some milestones. And, the reality is, particularly, in COVID, I was doing a lot of research when COVID broke open, and people were so worried about losing their jobs that they were working really long hours. And we've got this well-being burnout issue because people were trying to prove themselves, and yet their boss was saying, hey, I still don't know if you're working.
And look, I think employers were there were some employers we know certainly were taking advantage of that too. That were paying, that said, oh, we've got to reduce because of COVID. And, you've got to work extra hours, we're not paying you for it. Just anyway, sorry.
Yeah, well, it was a hard thing too. And then when people are stressed out, sometimes they need a little bit more space to recover. And, you know, Jamie, being the high-flying CEO that you are, you probably need to do that with yourself as well.
Yeah.
We all do. And it's hard because I'm one of these people, I work myself really hard. I've moved 4 times in 3 years. I've been renovating. I've had 2 kids with mental health issues, being pulled in every direction. And I was still trying to get I wrote a book during that time, and I was still trying to get things done. And I realized I'm actually exhausted. And I've had to give myself permission to sleep in and just take things a little bit easier. And I've realized now, 8 weeks after, you know, reaching a kind of a crisis point, that, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so much better and re-energized. And we have to all give ourselves that time and space to do that.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think managers too probably are particularly hard on themselves while they're trying to adapt to these changes, and they're hearing that they need to, you know, measure things differently. And I think co-creation is probably a really smart way of doing that. My mind, when you said that, I thought about how do you standardize that across a large organization. That's immediately where my HR brain went to. But I guess putting that aside, you know, what are some of the mistakes that managers can kind of look out for when they're establishing that trust with their employees?
Yeah, so there are quite a few things where I find leaders make mistakes. So the first one is assuming they have it because of their title.
Sure.
Because they're a leader. That's really an old school thing. And it goes against how our brains are developed. So trust is processed in the part of the brain, the limbic system, that is not based, it doesn't use words or language. It's actually based on feelings. So you can't actually talk your way into trust. You have to, you know, feel your way into it. So you've got to actually show through consistent action that you're doing what you'll say you're going to do. So, you know, employees will often complain in employee engagement surveys that leaders aren't walking the talk. People need to see that consistently over time to trust their boss. So there's that element that needs to be worked on. The second one that can be really detrimental, and I find most leaders do that, is we actually just believe that people trust the same way we do. But trust is very personal, and it's also very contextual. It's incredibly complex. And so how someone trusts can be very different to what you do. And so you can't rely on that. You know, a lot of leaders will tell me, oh, it's easy. You just be consistent and tell the truth. Well, I don't know many leaders that are consistent. They think they are, but they're not. They're inconsistent in their consistency without meaning to be. And then telling the truth, there are some things you can't say because you're not allowed to, or it's inappropriate. So, you know, we've got to really understand that if we want people to trust us, we have to get to know them better and understand their perspective and what they're going through, rather than make a whole lot of assumptions that actually reduces that gap.
You know, you're talking, and I'm sorry to hear about, you know, the issues with your kids, but I'm sure you're not alone. Coming, and I know you're not alone. I know a lot of people who are dealing with things, you know, post lockdown and extended periods, and, you know, going back to school and the anxiety and everything that comes with that. But from I suppose, an employer-employee relationship point of view, where's the line now as far as how much do you get involved with your team and you know, with their personal lives and their level of problems? And then when is too much, because, you know, as you said before, there's certain things that are taboo. You don't want to sort of step that line, and that might actually hold back a bit of that natural empathy. So I'm sort of curious to know if that relationship has moved, the needle's moved a little bit more into the personal life. But I suppose more to the point, where does that boundary, what does that look like now? And where's it start and stop? I mean, how responsible does an employer need to be? Yeah.
Well, this is very much about, you know, working it out with each person. So, you know, not everyone wants to share their personal lives. You know, I did some work with a country overseas, and I had a senior executive tell me that in the country he worked, you had a separate work phone and a separate personal phone, and never the two should meet. You never talked about home life. But how they treated people wasn't particularly good, so that he wasn't a very good role model, and he needed some work there. But, you know, we cannot, as human beings, delineate our personal lives and our work lives. You know, what's going on in our personal lives impacts our work and vice versa. And we've had this ridiculous thing for a long time that, you know, once you come into the office door, you leave all your personal problems behind. And that can be true in some instances. Like when you go to, I know that when I was going through personal crap, when I had a job, I actually enjoyed going to work because it distracted me. But, you know, it's a bit different when you're working from home. And those things are just staring you in the face. And of course, you can see people's animals and, you know, kids in the background and all that sort of stuff. So this really, at the heart of it, requires leaders who are willing to accept people for all their personal things that are going on and have the emotional courage just to have emotional check-ins with people to see how they're going. You know, just by asking the right questions and just checking in with people just helps them feel understood. You know, many years ago, I interviewed this, he was actually a CEO of a well-known company, but one of the international arms, and all the CEOs would meet, you know, once a month, and there was a big group CEO. And he announced during that meeting that he had cancer. Well, wow. Not one person asked him how he was going. The CEO just moved on to the next item. Oh. And he walked away feeling absolutely devastated. Now, he survived that cancer and everything was okay.
And he quit the job, I hope.
He quit the job. And he was just like, I couldn't trust them to be there for me. They didn't even care I had cancer. Like, wow. You know, that's an extreme version. But, you know, this was, you know, 10 years ago. And there are still companies that act like that. But, you know, when you do that, you're basically letting people know they're not important. And what humans want to know today, what employees want to know, is that they're not being treated like a tool of productivity, that they are treated as a human being and people care about them. You know, what we want at the bottom of our hearts is to be seen, to be valued, and to be appreciated. And that means understanding people's personal goals as well as work goals and aligning those. That's what really high trust leaders are able to do.
Yeah, love it.
Could I just ask you, Marie-Claire, just to keep elaborating on that, what else can leaders do to create trust in their teams?
Yeah, well, one of the things I unpack in my book is the integrated trust building system. And it's based on neuroscience and what people's brains need to feel safe. Because as human beings, you know, it sounds really dumb, but we're actually scared of other people. You know, because other people can, you know, they can hurt us. They can kick us out of the team when we don't have a job. And so we're constantly working out, you know, do people like me? Am I connected? Do I belong here? What's my future with these people? And when we feel that those questions are being answered in a negative way, we're more likely to drop out of that workplace. So the three main things, the foundational things that leaders need to focus on are creating or fostering safety. So that's, of course, not just the psychological bit, but the physical safety as well. And it's really around, you know, little things like sometimes our facial expressions or our emotional tone makes people feel unsafe. So it's being aware of those things. And then the second one is connection. So that sense of belonging, helping people to feel connected, harder to do when we're hybrid, but more important than ever. It's also about connecting how all the different pieces and parts of the business work together. So in effect, being a leader is really helping people to see the jigsaw, you know, the big picture of what it's going to look like, but helping people put the pieces of the puzzle together and what, you know, how they need to get there. And then, you know, you can sort of tell that when it comes to safety and connection, they interrelate. And foundational and supporting both of them is future. You know, what people want is to know that there is a future for their organization. You know, people want to see and hear that leaders are making the right decisions to ensure that company is going to survive. You know, in my research, people would say, I want to know the thinking behind that vision. What made you come up with that? What things did you reject? Why? They really wanted to know because they wanted to test that those leaders were making the right decisions so that they could get on board with the vision. And at the same time, they also want to know, well, what are the career development opportunities? You know, what learning opportunities are you going to give me? Are you going to give me the skills to reach that vision? And that is actually becoming the number one thing now to improve culture in organizations, according to a Microsoft study. People are leaving companies if they don't feel they're learning enough, or there aren't opportunities to learn or actually do well in their careers.
So I guess my question is really around, how do you qualify that? And you know, I think I agree with you, everything you're saying. I think it's great. I think, you know, you're coming here for us to help you progress a career, where some people might say, oh, you know, you're coming here to do a job, right? I need you to help do this job. And it's a bit sort of not counterintuitive, or it might have been counterintuitive a few years ago, but to actually say, hey, Marie-Claire, you're coming here, I want to know where your weaknesses are. That's my first conversation with you, right? Like, how do we help you grow? And you're like, hang on a second, this is weird. What are you doing? But I suppose, is there a science, or are there sort of research behind how effective that is? And I don't know if there's percentages. Is it 27% more likely that this person will be more productive? I don't know. Do you know? I'm just sort of curious on what that sort of scientific. I agree with you. As I said, I think that's the way definitely to go, to work with people and their growth as opposed to doing a job. But I'd just like to know if there's any sort of research behind it, or, you know, stats on how better off a company will be by going down this path.
Oh, off the top of my head, I can't tell you, but it's huge, and they keep coming out with more. I did do an article on it recently.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the stats off the top of my head.
That's okay. Yeah.
But it's becoming more and more important. And, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, particularly for younger employees, they don't often know what they want their career to be. So, you know, I'm a strong believer in one-on-ones, which I talk a lot about in my book, because one-on-ones and meetings really enable those 3 communication practices that I was talking about before. But it's really getting to know your people and what they want. And sometimes they don't know, but you don't want them putting the onus on you to help them work out their career. That's the worst thing any employee can do. I know I was guilty of that in my younger years. I used to kind of expect my boss to help me with my, you know, work out the career opportunities for me. But people really need to be empowered to think about that themselves and to work at that themselves. And, you know, a few years ago, I worked with this amazing guy. He ended up being a coach of mine, but he had founded this business in Melbourne. And he would tell me his process that he used with all his staff for one-on-ones. And he would basically work with them to work out their personal goals. And sometimes it was really hard, but then once he got that, then he could tie that to the business goals and the broader picture. And he had this amazing culture in his business, and he was doing that years before most people were doing that. You know, this was 2016, and I've written about it in my book and over the years. But this is one of the features that high trust leaders do. And now it's actually being seen as what needs to happen. The Microsoft study talked about that as well.
I can imagine they were a pretty happy team and a pretty high-performing team as well. They're achieving their personal and professional aspirations.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference. And, you know, really good leaders, I'll find they'll tell me that they'll say to their people, hey, look, you know, I know you're not going to work here forever. I'm totally fine with that. And I would actually recommend you, you know, work and do other jobs. But let's just work out what you're trying to achieve, and I can see how you can support them. I can support you. And that might even mean introducing them to someone in your network that's not even in the same industry. You know, when you show that support, people, you know, will trust and love you forever.
Yeah, bring down those walls. I think one of the things that leaders are grappling with as well, especially now that hybrid work is taking off, and, you know, there's an increase in the nomad visas. Jamie, I saw Portugal today is launching one. Leaders have diverse teams all over the world. And some leaders still kind of like that, you know, you talk about one-on-ones, but they kind of like to be able to see that person and pick up on those physical and verbal cues. But when you're managing a diverse team across different time zones, you know, how do leaders build trust where they can't physically get in the same room with their team? You know, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, it's still just have a one-on-one online, and you have to have the cameras on. And you can pick up some cues, but it's asking better questions as well to really delve a bit deeper. and to structure the one-on-one in a way that creates safety, connection, and future, but also really is about the other person, the employee, driving the one-on-one and what they need, rather than the boss, driving it and asking all the questions. It's, employees have
to be a two-way street.
It does. And, I'm not saying that trust is about the leader having to build trust all the time. Employees need to do it. They have to be visible as well and show that they're working. And there are ways of opening that up. We just can't assume that, we're so good as human beings to blame other people and not look at ourselves.
I suppose, one thing we were talking about prior to the show was just about the fact that people working remotely or in hybrid models don't have the good, the bad, the ugly that goes on in the office. And so therefore, what I feel like I'm doing might feel exactly the same as someone who is more senior to me. I think that my output, and I'm talking particularly about, I suppose, younger people coming in. I hate to sound like an old man when I say it, but that sort of younger generation that come through, and they don't. I was watching a thing by Simon Sinek, and he was talking about how the younger people sort of have an expectation. I'm doing the same as this person, but what they don't have is they don't have that resilience for the tough times. And I think that in an office, you can see it when there's a crisis and that someone's dealing with it or going through it. I think that you can see it when there's managerial support that comes into that. But I think in a hybrid model, you're missing a lot of this picture. And so it becomes, in my mind, it becomes quite one-dimensional, where people say, hey, I do A, B, C. They do A, B, C. I should be remunerated the same. But, in this video, it was basically talking about, well, no, these people get remunerated more because they've gone through that downtime. And my question is, how do you start to build the trust in a way to say, hey, look, Karen, I know you think you're doing this level. And to your point, employees don't trust their employers. Like, oh, they're just trying to con me and say, I don't deserve a pay rise. Where I'm saying, hey, you do deserve it, but you have to trust me in the fact that this is a progression. You know what I mean? This is a journey that gets you to that level. So how do you build that trust in a hybrid working where people don't come in and see the live full 360 picture?
Yeah, it's having those conversations about career paths and just unpacking it and saying, well, this is what I want you to be able to do, and articulate all those things that, they probably aren't seeing, which means having to think about that at a bigger level. And, maybe it's plotting out some milestones or plotting out some training, or, if someone's really keen to progress, should we be holding them back? Is another one as well, if they've got the skills to do it. I've, with the staff that I've had, they were doing stuff that people older than them were doing, and I ended up paying them the same amount of money, even though, legally I didn't have to because they were teenagers. But I just thought, well, you're doing the same work as an adult. This is really important stuff. I'm going to pay you the same. Now, that did cause problems with the adults. They were like, why is that 17-year-old on the same pay rate as me? And I'm like, because, this is mission critical stuff. So it's your ability to do that. But it's really about having the conversations, what that will look like, asking some questions about it. Sometimes there aren't solutions to all these questions. It's a matter of feeling around it and just asking the right questions and observing and working together to unpack it all.
Because we had an experience where one of our junior people had a pretty tough time, and there was an issue that, and they were like, oh, well, I sort of want to give up, I want to have a look around for another job. And it's like, well, hey, that's okay, don't worry, it's a bit of a down, and that's what experience is feeling like. It's not just getting everything right 100% of the time, it's dealing when you get with it wrong, how you react to it or respond to it. And I think that, not having that day-to-day sort of interaction, how to create that experience for people who don't have, the online, I think in my mind, that's, sort of an important thing to look at.
So, Jamie, you're probably talking about building resilience, right?
Totally.
In some of the formative team members. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that, resilience as I said before, I think it would go through observation and interaction, and, oh, wow, so-and-so had a bit of a bad time, and And there I can see other people's do it, but I think that the isolation of the hybrid work, it might not, it'd probably feel a bit more isolated and a bit more like, oh, I'm failing.
Yeah, I kind of like Marie Claire's suggestion around connecting them with someone within your network who's probably of a similar level. If you're a leader, for example, connecting them with someone network, so therefore there isn't that trust concern about being still within the reporting line, but yet they can leverage that experience to, that really resonated with me when Marie Claire mentioned that. Good idea. So almost establishing some informal mentoring scenarios. Interesting. Now, Marie Claire, you mentioned something around the achievement zone team. Can you talk just a little about what that is?
Yeah, so you've probably heard of Dr. Amy Edmondson, who coined the term psychological safety. So where people could take risks and make mistakes. She did a TED talk a few years ago, and she mentioned that when you have high performance and high psychological safety, is that right? Oh God, mine's gone blank. When you have high accountability and high psychological safety, they combine to form high performance. And at the time, I was thinking about that, and I realized that there were 4 different types of teams that I see, depending on the types, how much psychological safety and how much accountability. And so I actually call an achievement zone team, a teams that have got high safety, high accountability. So they're led by a leader who's really challenging people, providing stretch goals, providing that safe support network for people to really innovate, explore together, be curious about the future and where they're going, provide those learning opportunities. And when I did my research, I found that leaders who were in that zone, when you get a team in that zone, you pretty much will look back at that team zone for a long time and look back with like, wow, that was so amazing, because they don't always occur, that we move in and out of these team zones. So, down the bottom, I forgot low psychological safety and low accountability. That's the apathy zone. So, usually that's led by a very technically focused leader who might not really want to be leading people. They were just promoted into that position. So they don't have the skills. They might not even want the skills. So they undermanage people, or they might have lots of projects outside of that team that they're more interested in than having the burden of looking after people. So the team is in a lot of conflict, too scared to go above the mile because they might get told off, or, they're just not told enough about what they need to do. So they're in this constant fear state. And then to the right of that, we have what I call the abatement zone. Now, abatement, for those of you who don't know what that means, it means declining in performance. And I say that with no kind of judgment, because I didn't know either. And I was looking for a word that was like comfort zone. But this is very apt for this zone, because this zone is usually a team that's done well in the past and still thinks they're, really great, but their performance is declining. They're not improving things. They're not looking at things differently. They're just doing the bare minimum. So it could be because the leader themselves has got, personal challenges that are, taking over their time. They might just be stressed out, whatever. The leader's not being challenged, therefore they're not challenging their people. And so people in that team just, they're safe to not perform, like a pseudo safety. So they work like 9 to 5, escalate issues to their boss. The term quiet quitting that we're hearing a lot about lately are really teams in the apathy and abatement zone. And then we have the anxiety zone, which is very common. So particularly in high pressure industries, when you're working really hard, it's all about getting things done. It's not about people. So stress and burnout become an issue. People work themselves really hard. Now, it could be because the leader is really pushing people and overwhelming people with work, which is becoming a huge issue at the moment. Prioritization might be a problem. But sometimes teams, I've even met teams that have put themselves in this zone because they've got a lot to do and they're very conscientious. So they're actually working really hard. And I've had to actually work with the leaders of the business to actually reduce the stress levels. For one company, we ended up removing a client that wasn't making much money for the business, but was creating too much work.
Yeah.
And so, these 4 team zones, you can sort of see that they, we're not in them forever. We move in and out. As leaders, we can be in our own zone. It's different to our team, and our team members might be different as to where they are as well. But it gives you a little bit of a sense of, what's going on in workplaces.
Interesting. How do we share the load? So a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of leaders and the way they're interacting with their teams. But how do we sort of make everyone a leader? And how do we get everybody to be working on trust? Because in my mind, I think that's great, but it sort of feels leader dependent. But I think that in my mind, the next sort of evolution of this is probably about how do we actually teach the team members to be the leaders and to foster that trust and to recognise when there's the down dips. Because I'm sort of feeling like maybe that's a better way forward.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So with the work that I do, I often facilitate workshops with teams to not just make it the burden of the leader to fix. And so then, going through the models and going through this work, people have the language and the shared understanding. It's that shared understanding that becomes really important. And also a leader that's very open and says, I can't do this on my own. We need to work on this together. What can we do to get into that achievement zone? And having those conversations in team meetings or one-on-ones are really important. And I find that that's what companies are doing, particularly ones that I work with. And it's just changing everything for them because they're really on board together as a team. Because as you're right, you can't just be the leader pushing this.
Yeah.
Marie-Claire, that has been really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing us your thoughts. And I imagine that if people want to delve into more of the detail, particularly that achievement zone discussion that we just had, they can look to your book, which is, again, Trusted to Thrive. And thank you again for joining us on The Working World.
My pleasure.
Echoing Karen's sentiments, thank you so much for coming on The Working World. It's been fantastic. It's been insightful. I wish you all the best with the sales of your book, Trusted to Thrive. And yeah, I think that, I'm looking forward to see where your predictions go and how we sort of manage the next 12 months.
Interesting times.
Exactly.
Thanks, Marie-Claire. Okay. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.